What's it really like to live in Berlin? Now, if you search Google, you could find all kinds of information out there. But to cut to the chase, I'm going to ask ChatGPT what it thinks it's like to live in Berlin. Because, and not without controversy, ChatGPT is essentially pulling from all of the existing content out there. So I'm going to see what it thinks it's like to live in Berlin and see if it matches up with my 4 years of experience of living in Berlin. Now, in case you're new here, my name's Joe Bauer. I've lived in Germany for 7 years, 4 years in Berlin. I make travel films, outdoorsy videos, a lot of trail running, and if that at all remotely interests you, you should go check those out on my channel. Now that we're sliding into these slower winter months and I'm not going to be traveling as much, I thought I'd make more videos about life in Berlin, in Germany, in Europe, traveling around here, and also because it's easier to just set up my camera and go. Content is content. All right, now let's pull up ChatGPT. I'm going to be recording my phone. Let's see, 3, 2, 1. It's recording. All right, ChatGPT, let's open that up. What's it like to live in Berlin? All right, let's see what we got. Living in Berlin offers a vibrant cultural scene, diverse neighborhoods, and a rich history. It's all super vague travel stuff so far. The city embraces creativity, has affordable living compared to other European capitals. We've had a lot of problems about affordable housing lately, and the prices are going up, but still, in the grand scheme, that is true. And boasts a lively nightlife. Again, this is all very vague travel stuff. This is probably just pulled from various, 200-word descriptions from, a Lonely Planet or something. However, oh boy, this is true. However, winters can be cold and the city's size means commuting might take some time. Interesting that they're combining something about the winter. I thought they were going to go more down the rabbit hole of how it's not necessarily the best place to be during the winter, but somehow they're combining that with the city's size. So yeah, commuting might take some time, but also a lot of people are working remotely these days. So at least for me, I'm lucky that's not really a thing. Overall, it's a dynamic and ever-changing experience. Again, wildly vague stuff. It's so vague that I could be like, yeah, I guess it's true. It is dynamic and ever-changing. Uh, and of course, I mean, if any place is going to be ever-changing, 80 years ago, this was like the worst place in the world to be. You had Nazis running around. Still, unfortunately, a few Nazis running around, but they're not running the thing, is what I'm saying. And you had a wall dividing the city in half. That's not around anymore. The scars of it are still here, sure, and lots of lasting legacy that you can tap into. But yeah, if any place is ever changing, it's definitely Berlin. But that's not a whole lot. Let me see if I can get more reasoning. Let's go. Can you go more in depth on what it's like to live in Berlin? Not Birken. Berlin. Birken sounds like a Gherkin Berlin club, which that's a club I would actually go to. Oh boy, this is a whole lot more. I'm just going to skim it because watching me read probably isn't super fun. Let's see. More cultural diversity. Yeah, that's true. Maybe a good comparison would be to see if you throw in another major city. I bet they say cultural diversity for any world like New York, Paris, really any major city. Oh, I see my neighborhood coming up. So, unique character, Kreuzberg, Neukölln, lively mix of cultures, street art, and a bohemian atmosphere. Prenzlauer Berg is family friendly with green spaces and cafes. That's pretty up to date. So the story of Prenzlauer Berg, and that's actually my neighborhood, is a long time ago, around when the wall came down in the early 90s. A lot of people came into Prenzlauer Berg, which was in former East Berlin, and came for the affordable apartments, cheap apartments, or I think in many cases also just abandoned apartments, and developed this kind of punk rock scene. But over the years, the general story that I've gotten is that over the years, those people grew up. Some of them grew up and started families and had kids. And suddenly, all the late night riffraff, rock and roll, punk music, all that vibe was too loud for people who had babies and children running around. And so they started to push those folks out. Rents started to rise. And Prenzlauer Berg is, I think it's fair to say, one of the more expensive neighborhoods to live within the city, or at least within the Ringbahn of Berlin. Now, a small caveat I'll give to that: you can find exceptions. I don't want to make it sound like or misrepresent myself as, you know, living in one of the wealthier quarters of Berlin. Uh, what I always like, people walk outside of our building, they see our building, they'll be like, "Oh wow, do you live in this apartment?" And I will give them that. Yes, the facade, the exterior, it's very lovely, it's beautiful, and sometimes I walk by it myself, and I'm like, "My lord, we live here. This is great." But we went on an architectural tour during the pandemic when basically all you could do involving travel was find a local guide who was willing to walk outside with you for a bit. And we found this really cool architectural guide. He was Portuguese, I believe, but lived in Berlin for a long time, really passionate about architecture. And he goes by our building and a lot of buildings like ours and explains how in the front, the Vorderhaus was basically where the wealthy people lived. And then in the Hinterhof, which is like this inner courtyard area, is where they'd have like maybe stables and they'd put their horses. And then the building in the back is where all of their servants lived. Guess where we live? That's right, the Hinterhaus or the back house apartment, whatever. So I always like to point out that we don't live in the front where all the wealthy people. We live in the servants' quarters. Jealous? All right, let's keep going. Cost of living is some more cost of living stuff. It is relatively more affordable here compared to other European capitals, especially like London. Public transportation, I've talked about this before, public transportation is efficient, making it easy to navigate the city. Now, a lot of people can complain about public transportation. So I've lived here long enough that even I'll start to complain about public transportation. But I will remind myself that when I was last living in Cleveland, we would sprint to get to the train because we knew if we missed it, we'd be waiting like a good 15 to 20 minutes for the next one. Generally speaking, if you miss a tram that goes by, there's another one in like 5 minutes. Same for the U-Bahn. So generally speaking, it's pretty solid here, but of course you get people who complain and it can always be better. I mean, Japan, I think, is usually considered the gold standard for public transit where, they're embarrassed if they're late by a second. What else we got here? Berliners value a work-life balance and there's a laid-back attitude. I think that's fairly accurate. So the work-life balance is interesting. I think that's generally a European and German thing. I mean, you can get that in France and Paris as well, especially compared to the United States. I'm from the U.S., so that's generally my like goalpost for how I'm comparing things. Um, I do think because Berlin is also really known for its tech startup scene, and I think a lot of people who work there are heavily influenced by their American counterparts who more stereotypically will work longer hours and kind of what's the expression? It's they you want to work to live, not live to work. And so the American side, at least stereotypically, is that they will live to work, and you will, at least since I've been here, I've increasingly seen people, sending emails at certain hours. You're like, that's off the clock time, buddo. But that said, there's the German expression Feierabend. So you go, oh, schöne Feierabend. And basically, that it means like have a good evening, essentially. But Feier celebration Abend evening. But the concept is more like I'm shutting off. So like, if you leave the office, if you work in an office, you say, schönen Feierabend. That's basically being like, I'm toast for the day. Don't talk to me about work. So that's a concept that I think is still generally there. And it's definitely there legally. I think most important that it's there legally. Like in the US, I mean, they say like you work 40 hours a week, but again, it's been a while since I've lived there, but generally I felt less secure working there because if your boss didn't feel like you were putting in the effort, which could mean working more than 40 hours a week, then they could let you go and with like no notice. But in Germany, the legal system is still such that like as long as you're putting in your hours, like they can't get rid of you just because you're not living to work. If you do your hours, do your work, it's very difficult to get rid of somebody. So I definitely think that that's generally accurate. Wherever ChatGPT is pulling this from, that's pretty solid. The city's history is visible through landmarks like the Berlin Wall and the Brandenburg Gate, offering a constant reminder of its complex past. Complex past. That's a way to put it. Yeah, the history is very visible here, and that is one of the things I do like about it. When I was growing up, I never imagined myself, living in the big city. It's nothing that like I saw it as a goal. even when I moved to Chicago, it wasn't like I was like, oh, I want to live in the big city. It just kind of happened that way. And certainly Berlin, like, was never a goal. That also just kind of happened. Perhaps a little bit of kismet. I don't know. But now that I am here, I do like sometimes walk around and appreciate that like I'm in arguably one of the most historical cities in the world. Yeah, I think that's fair. And it's not just like things like the Berlin Wall and Brandenburg Gate. Like, when it says that, when I hear the city's history is visible, I like you truly see it everywhere. So the Berlin Wall, yeah, like you can walk by not just at Brandenburg Gate, wherever you're walking by where the Berlin Wall used to be, you can generally see where the scars are, or they might have a smaller memorial for all the various parts where it goes through the city. But there's also things like the Stolpersteine, which are like little plaques, cobblestone plaques that will mark where somebody, usually Jewish people who lived in a building, and what was their fate. Were they murdered? Were they deported? Did they escape and were safe in another country? And so when I think of like how visible the history is, that comes to mind first because no matter where you're walking in Berlin, you're probably going to come across some Stolpersteine. Stolpersteine, by the way, literally means like a stumbling stone. So the idea is that you're walking along the cobblestones and you'll stumble over this plaque because it looks different, and you'll stop to think about the people who used to live there. And that's something that I really appreciate about the city's living history, or how visible the history is here. However, the job market can be competitive, and learning German can enhance the overall experience as not everyone speaks English fluently. This is really interesting. I did not expect this from ChatGPT because if it's truly pulling from all of the information out there, more often than not, you'll hear people say, and this really grinds my gears, and maybe I should make another video about this, but you'll get a lot of people who aren't from Berlin who move here, and maybe I guess maybe even some Germans who will say Berlin isn't Germany. And that drives me nuts. And they say that because, for the most part, because there is a lot of English. And yes, you can go to maybe a coffee shop and try to order something in German, and they might respond to you, be like, oh, sorry, I don't speak German. That does happen. For the most part, though, you can speak German everywhere. It's a German first city. And to say that Berlin isn't German, to me, is almost like, the putzes in the US who'll be like, New York isn't real America. Like, why are we saying that one of the best examples of what a place can be doesn't identify with the actual country? So I think that's in the same way that I think that's taken something away from the US, people who say that New York isn't really the US. I think the same holds true for Germany. I don't understand this. Oh, Berlin isn't really Germany because more different people live here. I just don't understand. Just because you can get around in another language easier. I mean, that's true in lots of international places. Berlin is Germany, and you still have to speak German, especially like, I talked about in a pros and cons video, like how just terrible it is to go to the Auslandesbehörde. If you're moving here, you're going to have to go to the foreigner's office, and they don't do things in English. I've heard of exceptions. Exceptions do not make the rule in this case. I've heard some people say they could speak English and get by. But for the most part, and really anywhere in Germany, but also in Berlin, you need to speak German at these appointments if you want to get anything done. So I think that's interesting that it's saying that learning German can enhance the experience. And I do think that's true for whether it's especially traveling around Germany, because that's true in smaller places where if you speak German, you're just going to have a better interaction. And whether that's at a restaurant, a bar, or a shop, just somebody bumping into you on the street and just having a conversation, having German just makes it more feel like you live here. So it really drives me nuts when people are like, oh, you don't need to speak German. Like, you don't know. To start here, you don't need to be able to speak German. You can start in English. But yes, I, I've had mixed feelings about ChatGPT since it came out, but I tip of the hat to ChatGPT for encouraging folks to learn German to enhance their experience. I do agree with that. Moving on, the winters are cold, but the city compensates with numerous indoor activities and cozy cafes. Um, I can't think of additional indoor activities. Maybe I mean that, and what I mean is I don't necessarily think there are more indoor activities in the winter than that are offered than on other times of the year. Like museums, like you can go to museums year round. That's not unique to winter. If anything, I actually think that what Berlin and Germany in general does is they make the most out of the misery of the winter months. So uh, there's the Christmas markets. I'm not a huge Christmas market guy, but those are out there, and people will go out there and hang out for hours, have a glühwein, have a drinks, eat, and be outside for hours. When I come from a colder place in the United States, in Cleveland, and I lived in Chicago. Both of these places get much colder than Berlin. But basically, whenever if you're outside in either of those places, you're just moving between places. Your goal is to get inside as fast as possible. But in Berlin, like right now, we have a rare sunny day today in Berlin, and I bet somewhere that there are still Berliners sitting outside at a cafe, wearing lots of layers of clothing, bundled up with a blanket, but they're still sitting outside having a cup of coffee or whatever warm drink. So they definitely embrace the outdoors in the winter a bit better than other places. But in terms of numerous indoor activities that are unique to winter, that are in addition to helping folks get through the winter months, I don't really know what that's about. Cozy cafes. I mean, the cafes are the cafes. I don't know if they're especially cozy this time of year. They're just, I guess because they're warm. Maybe somebody puts a log in a fire. I don't know. Overall, Berlin is a city that celebrates individuality and is constantly evolving. So again, a lot of this language is pretty vague, basic travel languagey stuff, bloggy stuff. But I think that's a good summarization of Berlin in terms of celebrating individuality and constantly evolving. Uh, you can be whoever you want to be in Berlin, and I've talked about this in other videos where in Berlin you can find your people. So if you are the late night clubbing type, if you like to go to different kinds of clubs and whatever, stay out till all hours of the night, you can do that. Not my thing. You can go do that. But I like to be outdoors, being active. And Berlin doesn't have that stereotype. I'll give you that. But you can still do it. There are running clubs, rock climbing gyms, all these kind of things. There are so many parks you can go for a walk or a run. So whoever your people are, you can find them here. So when they're saying Berlin celebrates individuality, I think that's true. Constantly evolving, yeah, some would say probably for better or worse. I mean, this city definitely had to evolve quite a bit from its history to get to where it is now, where you've got, we have, interestingly, I believe we have the largest Palestinian and Israeli diaspora that live in Berlin. We have, besides the Israeli population, we have a resurging Jewish population. And you have people from all corners of the globe who live here. So definitely had to evolve a lot from its, as ChatGPT said, complex history, had to evolve a lot to get to this point. And how it continues to evolve, some would probably not be so thrilled with it. There's the new Amazon tower going up, and people are worried about what that's going to do to the local culture. Uh, Rents for apartments that are already incredibly difficult to come by, and the rents are of course increasing. So, but what place isn't constantly evolving? Again, a lot of vague things here that you could kind of find truth to if you think about it a little bit. But yeah, surprisingly, ChatGPT wasn't too far off the mark in terms of what it's like to live in Berlin. But if you want to dive down even deeper into the nitty gritty details of what it's like to live in Berlin, then watch this video on the pros and cons of living in Berlin.